Well, good morning, friends. On behalf of the whole John Carroll community, let me just say welcome back. It's good to have you with us. My name is Ed Hannenberg, and I am the Breen Chair in Catholic Theology here at John Carroll. And I'm glad to have you here. It's the 6th year that John Carroll has hosted the Theology for Teachers workshop. Last year, many of you know, the pandemic forced us online. But this year, as the signs around campus say, the blue streaks are back. So one thing we realized last year is that the online format allowed a number of teachers to participate who otherwise wouldn't have been able to participate. So this year we're attempting to do what everyone tells you not to do, which is run a workshop simultaneously in person and online. So bear with us. And I want to extend a special welcome to those of you who are joining us this morning by Zoom. We have 69 teachers registered for the on-campus workshop. Welcome to you all. We've got another 111 who signed up for online participation for a total of 180 teachers, which is just fantastic. It's almost like theology teachers want to have meaningful conversations about their work, right? Conversations that are both theologically substantive and practically relevant. And that really has been my mantra, and it's been our goal with these workshops. Theologically substantive and practically relevant. It's been what's guided our revision of our master's program, which is now offered both online and in person. It's been behind the creation of the Certificate in Theological Education, graduate level certificate that the Diocese of Cleveland now recognizes as fulfilling the academic requirements for certification and first renewal as a high school catechist. So we're just excited about all of this. And I'll have more to say about that later. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin, first for the folks in the room and then for those of you who are zooming in online. In your folders, you'll find a blue sheet that gives the schedule for the day. All right. Those of you who have done this before know that after this morning's keynote, which will take place in this room, you get to select one of 3 workshops. The rooms for the different workshops are listed on the program. Dr. Amy Roberts will be in this room if you're interested in that workshop. The other 2 rooms are in the other side of the building, and so you just would go out this long hallway, take a right, don't go down the ramp, but take a right, walk all the way down to the end of that hallway, and you'll see signs for both Joe Bruce and Dr. Jimmy Menkhouse's presentations. While I'm there are restrooms off that hallway. There are also restrooms behind this wall in the hallway right opposite me. Feel free, we've got breakfast set out, at least for this first session. The coffee and the water will be here throughout the morning. At noon, wherever you are, as the workshops finish up, I'd ask you to come back to this room before lunch. I've got some announcements. I'll explain the lunch procedure, and then we'll have our drawing for our door prizes. This is a new feature this year. So if you brought a lesson to share, there is a white box over on the table in the corner. Drop that off sometime before lunch, and we'll have that drawing here. Then we'll head out to lunch, and we've got free time until 1:30. After lunch, the 3 morning workshops will be repeated. Same presenters, same topics, but it gives you a chance to get to a second one. At the end of that workshop, this is sort of like our home base here, right? At the end of that workshop, I'll ask you to come back here. We'll complete the yellow evaluation form and finish with a closing beer and wine reception for those of you who are interested. The Zoomers. After the keynote, you've made it this far, so you're with us here. After the keynote this morning, you will leave the Zoom room you're currently in, and at 10:45, you'll click on the link for whatever morning workshop you plan to attend. okay? And that'll open up a new Zoom meeting. And the same thing in the afternoon. There's a unique Zoom meeting for each of the sessions. If you lose track of those links, you can always find them at theologyforteachers.com/Zoom. Okay. Did I forget anything? Okay. It has been our practice here to begin this workshop with a prayer for our students. So in your folders, you will find our prayer card. And I'm going to suggest we pray this in choir. And so those of you on my left here, closer to the door you came in, you'll take the first set of verses, 2 verses. And then those of you on my right, towards the coffee, will take the second set of verses, and we'll go back and forth, and hopefully God will hear us in the mess of it all. So let's say a prayer for our students. May you know the friendship of God, and may you know yourself in that friendship. May all your anxieties and fears, all your insecurities and doubts, melt away in the warm embrace of God's unconditional love. May your joy and enthusiasm, your life and your energy find its source and its goal in that love. Your resistance, your posturing and pretending, be transformed through the power of the Spirit. May your dedication to study be fruitful. May your generosity in service be blessed. May you come to see your own unique role in building the reign of God. May I come to see in you the presence of God, the face of Christ, and the gift of the Spirit. Amen. Amen. Thank you. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, an accomplished scholar, a genuinely pastoral theologian, and just a beautiful human being, Dr. Hosffman Ospino. Dr. Ospino, who is a native of Colombia, holds an MA in theology and a PhD in theology and education from Boston College. His research explores the dialogue between faith and culture and the impact of this interchange upon Catholic theological education, catechesis, and ministry. He has served as the principal investigator for several nationally recognized studies on how the Hispanic Catholic presence is transforming parishes, schools, and organizations. He has authored and edited more than a dozen books, including Interculturalism and Catholicism, Catholic Schools in an Increasingly Hispanic Church, and Reflexiones, Hispanic Ministry, authored with Tim Manavina. In his remarks, Hosffman takes as his point of departure an important text that came out last year and that may have gotten lost in the dumpster fire that was 2020. The newly revised Directory for Catechesis. So please join me in welcoming Hosffman Ospino, who will present Renewing the Passion to Teach, Insights from the New Directory for Catechesis.
Good morning, everyone. Well, how great to be with you here with colleagues, fellow theology teachers, scholars, and those who are passionate about sharing the faith, sharing the tradition, sharing the wisdom of church, theology, Catholic intellectual tradition. And I'm glad to know that there are so many of you also through Zoom. I'm always afraid of speaking in front of audiences on Zoom because they use the closed captioning, And with my accent, I have seen some bad words emerging, But if you see one of those bad words, that's not what I meant, So that's my disclaimer. So what we're going to do this morning in terms of this keynote or initial presentation is we're going to divide our time in 3 moments. So we'll do work for about 15 minutes. I will speak for about 15 minutes, give or take. Then we will pause for 10 minutes and have a couple of questions at our tables. We'll discuss them. Those of you on Zoom will have an opportunity of being in small groups. No? So there's already someone who has expertise on Zoom, no? And they will assign you to those groups. So just follow the instructions that you will receive. And you will also receive the questions, I believe, if not via email, they will be on the chat. So you'll receive those questions. Teaching is a vocation. Teaching is a vocation, and it's a vocation that actually connects us with the other in the quest for meaning. That's how we begin. And as a matter of fact, that's how the directory for Catechesis begins when it talks about the vocation of the catechist. It is about connecting on the journey, no, with those who are searching for meaning. It is likely that many of us chose teaching because we were searching for something. My wife is a social psychologist. And it's quite well known among psychologists that, when they choose that career, it's because they are trying to fix something in their own heads, no? But something similar happens with theologians. We teach theology, we teach religion because we are searching for something. And that search, it's not limited just to what we teach in terms of content. But what we discover is that as we share it with others, we discover something. We discover the mystery that we are attempting to understand. Perhaps we are engaged in the art of teaching because we discovered something and want to share that with others. So it's not only just about searching for something, but actually it's about finding something and wanting to share it with others. No? That's evangelization. That's at the heart of evangelization. We give what we have discovered. We give that which gives us meaning. In the midst of our daily tasks, and there are many when you're teaching, class preparation, curriculum selection, assessment, tests, reporting, disciplining, etc. There is always a reminder that teaching is a journey in which we find ourselves along the way with our students. And this is one of the first key points that I want to make in these initial reflections. Teaching is a journey, but it's not just the journey of the teacher or the educator. It's a journey in which we find ourselves along the way with our students. Therefore, when we reflect about the vocation to teaching, we have to think about locus, space, position, where that's happening. We locate ourselves not much in a physical space called classroom, auditorium, school, which is the case anyway, but we find ourselves located more in a process called a journey in which we together bring who we are and understand or seek to understand who those others are, mostly our students and our colleagues. The 2020 Directory for Catechesis, as Ed was reminding us, was published last year in the midst of a pandemic. Unfortunately, I have to say that the text has not received the attention that it should receive. As you know, since the end of the Second Vatican Council, there have been only 3 directories for catechesis. The first one was published in 1971. The second one was published in 1997. And the third one, right now, published in 2020. So it's quite likely that this directory will guide our understanding about catechesis and even theological teaching for the next 2 or 3 decades. If you have not read this document, I encourage you to do that. We don't have much time to go through all the details that we can learn and the wisdom that this document has to inform the way we do theology and teach theology, but I'm going to highlight a few aspects of it. I'm going to highlight 3 insights. Insight number 1, teaching the faith and teaching from a perspective of faith is an exercise that is joyful, merciful, and forward-oriented. These 3 words are all spread out throughout the Directory for Catechesis. And I find them fascinating and inspiring because, as a matter of fact, these 3 words, these 3 categories, actually borrow from the wisdom and the vision that Pope Francis has brought into the pontificate. Teaching is joyful insofar as we, as evangelizers, educators, teachers, share the joy of the gospel. We share the joy of Christ who is risen. We share the joy of being part of a community that has been called to salvation. Teaching is joyful because it is an opportunity to build church. It's an opportunity to foster communion and an invitation to experience God's reign in the here and now of history. At the same time, teaching is merciful. And teaching is merciful insofar as we are able to, 1, reflect about how God has loved us. And in reflecting how God has loved us, then we exercise the ministry of loving others. And that's what happens in the process of teaching, especially teaching theology. We reflect about what it means to be loved, and in being loved, we exercise the ministry of loving those who engage with us in the process of education. But perhaps one of the most important characteristics of teaching that emerges from the Directory for Catechesis is the idea that teaching is forward-oriented. And that means, actually Pope Francis uses a category that was originally conceived in Spanish, and it appears in his exhortation, The Joy of the Gospel, en salida. Teaching is an experience of going forward. Even when we teach history, even when we teach the tradition, always it is about moving forward, going forward, being en salida. It is an experience that looks at the future, and we will talk about the future in a few minutes. Therefore, as teachers of theology, we are invited into practices of teaching that are joyful, merciful, and forward-oriented. 2, there is so much to learn from how God teaches. And we know this through salvation history. We know this through our exploration of the scriptures, the tradition, the history of the church, the history of the world. The Directory for Catechesis dedicates a substantial section to talk about God's divine pedagogy. We learn about God's divine pedagogy in order to inspire our commitment to teaching the faith and teaching from a perspective of faith. From a perspective of a divine pedagogy, God comes to the encounter of humanity in history by taking the initiative. God takes the initiative and does it freely. God takes the initiative and does it freely. And in doing that, God comes to our encounter in the context of the here and now of history, turning it into salvation history. That encounter with God. That's part of the divine pedagogy. So let's begin to even imagine what teaching could be like when we encounter the other. And in that encounter, the experience becomes salvific. God, in the process of encountering humanity in history, respects how humanity learns. God does not impose divine knowledge or the divine plan. God allows humanity to discern, to be critical, to make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes. God takes time, years, decades, centuries. In the process of this divine pedagogy, God transforms us with grace and love. The encounter with God in the context of history is a graceful and loving encounter. Graceful and loving. And that becomes embodied to perfection in the plan of salvation in the presence of Jesus Christ. It is through Jesus Christ, truly human and truly divine, then, that God journeys with humanity, and journeys with humanity as a saved community or a community constantly called to salvation. From the perspective, then, of God's divine pedagogy, we are invited into practices of teaching that follow similar patterns to how God comes to the encounter of humanity. 3. Teaching the faith and teaching from a perspective of faith do not happen in a vacuum. And the directory, as a matter of fact, spends a lot of time reminding us that, whether it's catechesis, for teaching in the classroom, teaching in a Catholic school, or teaching the faith in the context of a parish or elsewhere, the teaching of the faith does not happen in a vacuum. It always happens in the particularity of the here and now. The Directory for Catechesis, then, reminds us what the Second Vatican Council insisted on with intensity and intentionality, that we must teach with a historical awareness that what happens, that the mystery of salvation, that the encounter with the God of revelation happens here, in time and now, in particular spaces. It doesn't happen in the abstract. The teaching of religion, the teaching of theology, is something that is historically grounded. And there are two categories that the directory invests in expanding throughout its pages. One, enculturation. According to the directory, the gospel, which follows the logic of the incarnation, is always incarnate or becomes incarnate in different and particular cultures. And that means that we must pay attention to the particularities of cultures and the different cultures and how these appropriate the gospel one way or another. Inculturation is an invitation to humility, to realize that what we understand as Christianity, as faith, as culture, and so on, is shaped by the particularity of our experiences. And that which we consider normative, or that which we consider the standard understanding of the faith, for other people may be different. Same Christ, same faith, same church, yet inculturated understandings of Christianity. And this, as a matter of fact, makes a lot of sense in a culturally diverse church like the United States of America. A church in which being white, you're American, or being Hispanic, or being black, or being Asian, Pacific Islander, or Native American are expressions of being Christian, being Catholic, with nuanced, inculturated ways of being. And besides inculturation, we have contextuality. Context matters. Context matters. The way we teach theology in Cleveland, Ohio, is not necessarily the same way in which we teach theology in San Diego, California, or Miami, Florida, or Bogota, Colombia, or Nairobi, or name it, the Philippines, France, or any other part of the world. So context matters because people are rooted in the particularity of their realities. The teaching of theology and the passing on of the faith, therefore, is constantly aware of the problems, questions, hopes of the communities. We are invited into practices of teaching that are historically grounded, inculturated, and contextual. So I'm gonna ask you to spend 10 minutes at your tables and engage the following two questions. And those of you who are on Zoom, you will be invited to go into the smaller groups. What did you hear in this initial reflection? What gives you joy in your teaching? And what role does your spiritual life play in nurturing that joy? You got 10 minutes, friends. Let's pause for a minute and think of something beautiful. Think of something beautiful. There is no definition of beautiful here. There is no standard for beauty. Whatever in your mind, in your heart is beautiful, think of something that is beautiful. Classical and medieval philosophers remind us of the human quest for the transcendentals. I'm pretty sure that you have taught the transcendentals at some point in your classes, or those core properties of being, the true, the good, and the beautiful. much of education throughout history, as a matter of fact, has been focused precisely on preparing minds and hearts to identify, understand, describe, contemplate the transcendentals. When one looks at the curriculum of the cathedral schools or the early universities, or when one looks at the Ratio Studiorum, or many of the programs that have been developed in catechesis or Catholic schools and so on, one can pretty much organize them around the transcendentals, the quest for the truth, for the good, for the beautiful. This is exactly what Catholic education is all about and has been for centuries. Now, we must also acknowledge that contemporary approaches to education, unfortunately, have lost much intentionality when it comes to placing the transcendentals at the center. Such is the case, particularly in our modern world, since the turn to a mechanistic understanding of reality, and today we speak of a turn to the technical. For instance, much of the conversations in our Catholic institutions or in many institutions of education, whether faith-based or not, center around STEM: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the hard sciences. But how much do we speak about truth, the beautiful, the good, when we teach math, when we teach engineering, when we teach science and technology? Catholic institutions of education actually remain at the forefront of this conversation. Several philosophers, several educators, several analysts have actually called attention to the crisis of the humanities and the liberal arts throughout the world. In Europe, particularly in England, but also in the United States of America, we see that faculties of humanities, faculties of arts, are morphing into something different, sometimes disappearing altogether. So the question for us is, what happens when we fail, when we do not pay attention to the transcendentals? What kind of education emerges from that? Curriculum in Catholic education in recent decades has interestingly emphasized two of these three transcendentals that I just named: true and good. It is common, for instance, to see in our curriculum emphasis on the search for the truth as we increase our resources, our faculty, our investment in science. We teach our students to experiment and to learn from the scientific experimentation or scientific method. We train our students to document their ideas so they are as exact as possible. We also are concerned about the truth as we teach our students to debate, to persuade, to argue with clarity. We, in our Catholic schools, in our Catholic education, have emphasized or overemphasized the good. It is very noticeable, for instance, to look in the standards for that the USCCB provided for the teaching of theology in Catholic schools, the overemphasis on morality. You teach this on a regular basis. So there is an emphasis on morality, on behavior, on sexuality, on family mores, on decision making, on the good and the bad, and so on. But we also see this emphasis about the good, the transcendental, the good, no, in our emphasis about rights and responsibilities. We teach our students about their rights. We teach them about their responsibilities, what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be someone in community. Also, many of our schools champion curricula that focuses on awareness about justice and injustice in the world. However, I think that sometimes when we look closer, we have lost awareness about the beautiful. It's not as emphasized as it could be. And the 2020 Directory for Catechesis, as a matter of fact, makes an interesting turn and brings our attention as educators back to the beautiful, the pulchrus, as they call it in Latin. As a matter of fact, the Directory speaks about educating in the faith through the via pulchritudinis, the way of beauty, through the way of beauty. Beauty is a way to God because God is beautiful and God is the source of beauty. That's what the Directory reminds us. Beauty is a way to God because God is beautiful and God is the source of beauty. Everything that is beautiful is a reminder of the divine. Everything. Regardless of how you define beauty. One of the most fascinating experiences that one can have is visiting different cultures and being exposed to ideas of beautiful. I had a chance to spend some time in Africa and learn from people describing the beautiful, whatever they described as beautiful, and it was an entire learning experience. Beautiful in Mexico is not necessarily what's considered beautiful in Argentina, when it comes to religious art, for instance. Beautiful is not the same in Europe as it is considered in Asia. And here in the United States of America, we find ourselves in these culturally diverse communities, societies, pluricultural societies, in which concepts of beautiful or concepts of beauty not compete, but share the center stage. And they all lead to God. They all are ways towards God. Remember Thomas Aquinas? Thomas Aquinas and his 5 ways to prove the existence of God. Well, whether you agree or disagree with those arguments, the truth is that they teach us something interesting about how our human existence is linked one way or another to the existence of the divine. In those 5 ways to prove the existence of God, Aquinas' 4th argument is traditionally called the argument from gradation of being. Everything participates in the qualities of reality to a certain extent or to a certain grade. Things are more or less perfect. Things are more or less useful. Things are more or less beautiful. But none of them are perfectly beautiful because only to God belongs being beautiful in essence, in perfection. Beauty places us before the possibility of being mesmerized by the divine as compelling. In some ways, beauty is an invitation into the mystery of God, the ultimately beautiful. The mystery of the human, that being that is capable of admiring what is beautiful. And the mystery of reality, that which embodies beauty in all its dimensions. And this is a fascinating understanding of reality. Reality as that which can embody the beautiful. Beauty, then, is one of the transcendentals that needs to be rescued in our teaching. If we want to renew the passion for teaching, we want to renew the passion for learning in our students, yes, talk about the truth. Yes, talk about the good, but don't forget the beautiful. Don't forget the beautiful. Because those three are intimately intertwined, interrelated. Allow me to read number 109 in the Directory for Catechesis. Notice how it is phrased. Whenever the directory says catechists, obviously it's a directory for catechesis, think about teachers or theologians, whatever you call yourselves. Beauty is always and inseparably steeped with goodness and truth. Therefore, contemplating beauty elicits within us sentiments of joy, pleasure, tenderness, fullness, meaning, thus opening us to the transcendent. The way of evangelization is the way of beauty, via pulchritudinis, and therefore every form of beauty is a source of catechesis. In demonstrating the primacy of grace manifest in a special way in the Blessed Virgin Mary, in making known the lives of the saints as true witnesses of the beauty of faith, in giving prominence to the beauty and mysteriousness of creation, in discovering and cherishing the incredible and immense liturgical and artistic heritage of the Church, in valuing the highest forms of contemplating art, catechesis, theological, teaching theology, education in general, shows concretely the infinite beauty of God, which is also expressed in the works of human beings, and leads those who are catechized toward the beautiful gift of the Father has made in his Son. How does this make it then into our practices of teaching, teaching the faith and teaching from a perspective of faith? Well, here are some ways of doing it. First, we need to integrate more in our ways of teaching theology and teaching in general the contemplation of the created order as beautiful. How many of us spend time outside with our students? How many of us invite our students to contemplate the beautiful? I have an 8 and a 10-year-old, and with my two children, actually they catechized me in this particular way. They taught me how to stand in front of a flower or a bee and say, wow, life moves too fast. We get too busy. We need to teach our students, we need to teach one another the art of contemplating the beauty of the created order. How many of us are teaching justice as beautiful? When we look at, for instance, movements about racial justice, when we listen to our sisters and brothers who are Black and they tell us being Black is beautiful, being brown is beautiful. It's more than the aesthetic beauty, it's justice as beautiful. We need to retrieve in our teaching of theology and religion art, the role of art, both religious and non-religious, and from different cultures. How do we integrate that? Today, or nowadays, there are all these apps that we could use, that bring us into the greatest museums, the Vatican and many other museums, that we can actually use to teach the beautiful. Teaching theology should also be about cultivating sensibilities that allow us to contemplate beauty. How many of us has ever gone or have ever been to a museum, stand in front of a work of art and not know what to do or how to admire it? Because nobody taught us. Nobody taught us. We as theologians and as women and men who are teaching theology in these Catholic schools should be masters, no, should be experts of teaching our students how to appreciate art. And finally, collaborating with other disciplines, especially those that focus on the artistic. For instance, we should be collaborating with those who teach music. We should collaborate with those who teach poetry and painting and sculpture and theater, creative writing, and others. That's theology at its best. "10 minutes at your tables." What did you hear in this brief reflection? How do you incorporate beauty or can do more to bring awareness to the beautiful in your teaching? Think for a minute about a time when you felt accompanied. Think about a time when you felt accompanied. What difference did it make when you felt truly accompanied? What happens when we decide to walk with others and listening to them? What happens? I think something miraculous. Something miraculous. Imagine an entire educational model that precisely does this. Walk with the other and listen to her or him. That's it. Walk and listen. Well, that's at the center of a word that is in vogue these days, synodality. No? The word synod, no, meaning walking along the way with others. That's what it means, walking with others. But it's not just merely walking with others, it's walking while listening. Walking while listening. It's fascinating that when I read about Catholicism in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, there is so much excitement about synodality. And then I turn to the United States of America, and we are stone cold about that. Why? Why do we resist an invitation to walk and listen? The directory for Catechesis, the 2020 directory for Catechesis, actually doesn't mention the word synod or synodality at all. Doesn't mention the word synodality. Yet, no, it implies it everywhere. It is implied everywhere. Everything breathes synodality in this. Because synodality, as a matter of fact, is actually an experience, an ecclesiology, an understanding of being church, being people of God, no, that certainly is highlighted in the Second Vatican Council, but it goes through the entire tradition, right from the time of Jesus and the apostles. Although the directory doesn't use the word synodality, It comes close to mentioning what is understood by that word in its use of the term accompaniment. Accompaniment. Listen to these beautiful words. And here, I'm going to change what, whenever the text says catechist, I want to say theology teacher, okay? Because I need to honor you here today. Number 113. An accompanier, an educator of those. So it's referring to the theology teacher, the catechist. So the theology teacher should be an accompanier and educator of those who are entrusted to him or her by the church. The theology teacher is an expert in the art of accompaniment. Expert in the art of accompaniment. Has educational expertise, is able to listen and enter into the dynamics of human growth, becomes a traveling companion with patience and a sense of gradualness, in docility to the action of the Spirit, and through a process of formation, helps his or her brothers to mature in Christian life and journey toward God. The theology teacher is an expert in humanity, and knows the joys and hopes of human beings, their sadness and distress, and is able to situate them in relation to the gospel of Jesus. Hey friends, if you don't get excited about this, what gets you excited? Huh? This is unbelievable. This is amazing, no? This is a fabulous vision for teaching theology, for catechizing, for teaching religion, for sharing the faith. These two dynamics, walking and listening, go hand in hand in any process of renewal of our teaching. When we talk about walking, here we go back to the need to be aware of the space in which we are, the position, the locus where we are. Okay? Remember what we talked at the beginning about evangelization. Walking is about meeting people where they are. And that sounds cliche these days, because we always say we meet our students where they are. We meet the people we serve in our parishes or wherever other settings we work in where they are. But when we go deeper into that word, what it means is we meet people in their realidad, in their reality. We meet them in their reality. It's not about meeting them halfway in my reality, but it's immersing ourselves into reality. That's the only way we can understand the preferential option for the poor. That's the only way we can understand how to advocate for marginalized communities in our society and in our church. That's the only way we are going to understand the struggles that many people may have or the hopes that our young people have. You are teaching an age population that struggles with questions of identity, particularly religious identity. No? So it is understanding their reality that this walking implies. Walking demands taking the time, patiently journeying with the other. Sometimes in our theology classes, in our programs, in even the RCIA and other exercises of teaching theology, we want to turn Catholics overnight, or Christians and disciples overnight. It takes a lifetime. A journey. We need to adjust our expectations when it comes to teaching the faith. Walking means gazing at the other with love. And on this one, I'm inspired by Don Bosco. That's what he did with the children he worked with. He loved them. He loved them as a father. He loved them as a priest. He loved them as a fellow Christian. No, gazing at the other with love. Getting out of the comfort zone, not waiting, but reaching out. And when we speak about listening, the term in the directory evokes Gaudium et Spes and the invitation to read the signs of the times. That's what we do. Listening demands reading the signs of the times. Reading the presence of God in the here and now of the circumstances in which we are, and teaching others how to do that. Teaching others how to do that. Listening, according to the directory for Catechesis, is an invitation into a charismatic catechesis. What's the charismatic catechesis? We need to be able to proclaim the kerygma with joy, with passion, with conviction, and allow for people, create the conditions for others to listen to that kerygma. No? There are far too many Catholics who have stopped self-identifying as such. As you already know, in the United States of America, the median age when a young person stops self-identifying as Roman Catholic is 13. It's 13, no? And most of these children, young women and men, have not heard the kerygma. Because if they had heard it, I think it would be more difficult to stop self-identifying as such, as a member of the faith community. So we need a charismatic way of teaching theology that announces a living Christ. And I'm preaching, no? So just to let you know. Listening begins with listening to the Word of God, especially in the community where we celebrate or with which we celebrate. Listening is about opening our eyes, our hearts to others, especially those who are most in need. There you have it. God is calling, it's just a... And then, and listening also implies, the directory reminds us, listening to our world, to the created order. And this is Laudato Si at its best. Listening to the world, listening to the created order. Are we teaching our students to do that? Do we walk and listen? Do we teach them to walk and listen? Synodality is such a rich category, such a rich term. And I think that we can learn much from it to inspire our teaching. Let me highlight 4 characteristics of synodality that emerge from the document by the International Commission, or Theological Commission, called Synodality in the Life of the Church, this document. 1, synodality manifests the pilgrim character of the church. This means that we need to understand that our journey doesn't end here, that we are not educating these people, these Christians, or our students, just to pass a grade or just to graduate from a school, but we are educating them for eternity. And that really places us in a whole different perspective. How many of you, or how many of us, because we all teach theology, enter the classroom mindful, aware that we are teaching these young women and men for eternity? I think that our teaching changes, completely changes. We're teaching for eternity. 2, synodality means that the whole church is subject and that everybody is subject in the church, and everyone in the church is a subject. In other words, synodality affirms the voice of every baptized person. When we accompany, when we walk, and when we listen, we affirm the voice of everyone who is engaged in the educational experience. 3, synodality is a living expression of the Catholicity of the Church as communion. Synodality is not just about the individual. It's a reminder that we are baptized, and this an invitation to be baptized and disciples in community. And finally, synodality, or a synodal church, is a church of participation and co-responsibility. Synodality is an invitation to participate and feel and know ourselves responsible for the church, for the tradition, for the world. So what does teaching from a synodal perspective look like? I think that we need to start imagining pedagogies that emphasize listening and walking together. Teachers, more than teachers, should see themselves or ourselves as pilgrims along the way with our students. That's who we are, pilgrims. We need to create learning spaces where everyone is affirmed as a subject, everyone or as a person. Teaching needs to become an exercise of communion, communion with other baptized, communion with the human family, communion with the world, including the created order, and communion with God in the person of Jesus Christ. Synodality is an invitation to teach, to participate, and assume responsibility for who we are as members of the church and as citizens of the world. That's the invitation. Walk and listen. This time, we got 5 minutes. So, what did you hear, and what could you do to be a better companion for your students and your colleagues? Go ahead, friends. 5 minutes. Very good, friends. So our colleagues from the Zoom world have been teletransported back into this room. And so I want to thank you all for engaging this morning. So 3 words that I leave you with: evangelization, beauty or beautiful, and synodality. There's a lot of wisdom and richness in this document, Directory for Catechesis. If you have a chance, spend some time with it, read it, and there's a lot that can rekindle and strengthen your work as teachers, your vocation. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Well, thank you very much, Hosffman, for that, for your remarks and your own passion and commitment. It's been good having you with us. A couple of quick announcements before we go to the breakout sessions. The drawing. So if you did bring a lesson you want to share and want to be entered in for the drawing, the box is over on the table in the corner there. Please leave it there on your way out, and we will pick our winners back in this room after the breakout sessions before lunch. For online registrants, those of you, the Zoomers, you're in a separate drawing, and so you have until the end of the day today if you want to upload your a lesson to enter into your own drawing. There's plenty of, there's food and drink left here, so let's not let that go to waste. Feel free to grab a yogurt or a bagel or something and take it to your next session. Refill on coffee is here because we don't have it in other places. The breakout sessions, just to remind you, we've got 3. In this room at 10:45, they all begin at 10:45. In this room will be Dr. Amy Roberts speaking on crafting, engaging lessons that touch both the head and the heart. Dr. Roberts is an experienced high school teacher and is on the catechetical faculty at the Franciscan University of Steubenville, so she has some, I think, some very helpful practical tips on engaging students. In the O'Day room is Miss Jo Bruce, who is a high school teacher at Fuchs Mizrachi School here in Beechwood. She has spent years teaching Bible to Jewish students from a Jewish perspective, obviously. And she's going to present a little bit on how teaching the Bible within the Jewish community and the Jewish faith might help inform and enrich the way in which Catholics teach the Bible within the Catholic tradition. And then finally, Dr. Jimmy Menkhaus will be in the Murphy room, and he has a workshop to help you work through your own thinking about your own programs of service learning, immersion, and so on, particularly in